New York City. May 1894. The Upper East Side at the end of the 19th century was a place of constant motion. Horse-drawn wagons rattled over uneven streets before sunrise. Laundry steam drifted from apartment windows. German, Irish, and Eastern European immigrant families crowded into narrow tenement buildings where entire lives unfolded inside a handful of rented rooms. Behind many apartment doors, privacy existed more as a performance than a reality. On East 61st Street, two young women lived together quietly under the name Mrs. Lang. The name appeared on their apartment door and in small laundry advertisements placed locally. It was not uncommon for unmarried working women to use aliases or altered household names in boarding districts to avoid attention, protect employment, or discourage questions from landlords and strangers. One of those women was 21-year-old Minnie Weldt. In May of 1894, her death would become one of the most unsettling unsolved murders reported in New York newspapers that year. The case contained all the elements that disturbed the public imagination of the period: a young immigrant woman, a cramped apartment entered during the night, mysterious male visitors, contradictory witness testimony, and a killer who appeared to vanish into the city without leaving certainty behind. More troubling still was the setting. Minnie Weldt was not found in an alley, on a riverbank, or in one of the isolated outskirts of the city. She was found dead inside her own room, surrounded by neighbours living only feet away. Tonight, we return to the surviving records surrounding the Minnie Weldt murder through newspaper archives, inquest testimony, and the fragmented investigative trail left behind in New York during the spring of 1894. Minnie worked as a washerwoman. Like thousands of immigrant women in Manhattan at the time, she survived through exhausting domestic labour, cleaning, pressing, and carrying clothing for wealthier households. The work paid little, demanded long hours, and rarely offered stability. Workers often took in extra washing from apartments nearby to supplement income. She shared the East 61st Street apartment with Helen Carlert, another young German immigrant. The building itself was typical of the neighbourhood: crowded staircases, thin walls, shared hallways, and constant movement of tenants and visitors at nearly every hour of the day. Residents knew fragments of one another's lives, but very little completely. And in the days before Minnie's death, several tenants later claimed they had noticed unfamiliar men visiting or asking for her. The final hours of Minnie Weldt's life were reconstructed imperfectly through witness testimony gathered after the murder. On the evening of May 29, 1894, Minnie was reportedly seen inside the apartment building on East 61st Street. Neighbours later recalled hearing ordinary movement within the rooms upstairs, footsteps, doors opening and closing, muffled voices carried through thin walls. At some point during the night, that routine ended violently. The next morning, Helen Carlert discovered Minnie dead inside the apartment. The scene immediately alarmed police. Minnie had been strangled. A handkerchief was reportedly involved in the attack, and medical examination revealed marks around her neck consistent with forceful compression. Investigators also observed signs suggesting a struggle had taken place inside the room before death. Early theories briefly focused on robbery. Police believed approximately $20 might have been missing from the apartment, a meaningful amount for working-class immigrant women in 1894. But that theory weakened after the money was later discovered hidden inside a stocking, suggesting theft had not been the primary motive after all. That discovery shifted the investigation sharply away from simple burglary and towards something far more uncertain. Detectives began asking a more troubling question: who had entered Minnie Weldt's room during the night, and why? As police interviewed tenants inside the building, one account drew particular attention. A neighbour later identified in reports as Mrs. Bowes claimed she heard a man leaving the apartment around the estimated time of the killing. More unsettling still, she reportedly described him laughing quietly to himself as he exited the building. The detail appeared repeatedly in newspaper coverage because of how strangely calm it sounded against the violence investigators had just uncovered. The man was described as tall, stout, and dressed in dark clothing. Police never conclusively identified him. The investigation into Minnie Weldt's murder quickly became tangled in conflicting testimony, shifting theories, and the limitations of 19th century police work. Detectives first focused on the people closest to the victim. Helen Callett, Minnie's roommate, was temporarily detained and questioned extensively after the body was discovered. Because she lived inside the apartment and had been the one to alert others to the crime, investigators scrutinized her movements carefully. Newspapers immediately sensationalized the arrest. For several days, Helen's name appeared prominently in reports alongside speculation about jealousy, hidden relationships, and domestic conflict. But despite aggressive questioning, police failed to establish evidence directly connecting her to the murder. Attention then shifted toward Minnie's male acquaintances. Investigators learned that several men had reportedly visited or attempted to contact her in previous weeks. Among those questioned was Emil Bortis, a former streetcar conductor from Hoboken, who knew Minnie through prior association. Bortis quickly became one of the most discussed figures in newspaper coverage. But unlike the fictionalized versions later attached to the case, Emil Bortis was never formally prosecuted for Minnie Weldt's murder. Detectives examined his timeline and eventually concluded he possessed a strong alibi during the critical hours surrounding the killing. That left investigators with suspicion, but no stable suspect. The mysterious, tall, stout man in black remained central to the investigation. Witnesses continued describing unfamiliar male visitors near the apartment building, but accounts varied too widely for detectives to build a reliable identification. And as the case dragged forward, the weaknesses of 1890s forensic investigation became increasingly visible. There was no fingerprint comparison system in practical criminal use. Blood evidence could not yet identify individuals. Crime scene preservation remained inconsistent. Detectives depended heavily on witness memory, neighborhood gossip, physical observation, and contradictions in testimony. The apartment itself complicated matters further. Tenement buildings on the Upper East Side experienced constant traffic, boarders returning late from work, laborers climbing staircases after midnight, visitors entering rooms quietly to avoid notice. Detectives struggled to determine who truly belonged in the building and who may have appeared only briefly during the night of the murder. As police stalled, newspapers filled the uncertainty with increasingly dramatic theories. Some articles portrayed Minnie's death as a crime tied to hidden romance or rejected advances. Others suggested a stranger had entered the building searching for vulnerable women. Then, another theory began emerging in print. Certain newspapers started connecting the case to rumors of a roaming maniac or Jack the Strangler figure operating in New York City. A shadowy attacker supposedly linked to assaults against women across boarding houses and working-class districts. Modern historians treat many of those newspaper claims cautiously. The press of the 1890s frequently linked unrelated crimes together to sustain public fear and readership interest. But the appearance of those theories revealed something important about the atmosphere surrounding the case. The city no longer believed Minnie Welt's murder looked ordinary. Despite enormous newspaper attention, the Minnie Weldt case never advanced into the kind of formal murder trial later fictionalized in retellings. Instead, the investigation reached its legal peak during the coroner's inquest. Witnesses testified regarding Minnie's final movements, the condition of the apartment, and the men reportedly seen visiting or asking for her before the murder. Physicians described the signs of strangulation and confirmed that death had resulted from homicide rather than accident. But the testimony rarely aligned cleanly. Timelines conflicted, descriptions changed between interviews, some witnesses contradicted earlier statements once questioned publicly, and crucially, no one could place a specific suspect inside Minnie's room at the precise moment of the killing. The testimony involving the unidentified man in black generated particular attention. Neighbours described seeing or hearing him near the building, but details remained frustratingly vague. Investigators could not determine whether he had entered the apartment, visited another tenant entirely, or become unintentionally exaggerated through rumour after the murder became public. At the conclusion of proceedings, the coroner's jury delivered its official finding: Minnie Weldt had died by murder at the hands of person or persons unknown. The wording reflected the central failure of the investigation. Police had successfully established homicide. They had not established the killer. No suspect could be held long enough to support prosecution. no confession emerged, and without physical evidence capable of definitively placing someone at the scene, the case gradually began slipping beyond the reach of formal law enforcement. Still, the public fascination did not disappear immediately. Newspapers continued revisiting the murder throughout the summer of 1894, often presenting the crime as evidence of a larger danger moving through New York's working-class districts. For many readers, the most terrifying aspect of the case was not the violence itself, it was the uncertainty afterward. Someone had entered a crowded residential building, murdered a young woman inside her room, and left almost no trace strong enough to survive legal scrutiny. The Minnie Weldt investigation slowly faded from active newspaper coverage as 1894 continued. Without a prosecutable suspect, detectives gradually exhausted their leads. Witness memory weakened over time. Rumours multiplied faster than verifiable facts, and like many urban homicide investigations of the 19th century, the case eventually dissolved into fragments preserved mainly through archived reporting. For Minnie Weldt herself, little remained publicly beyond the circumstances of her death. She was remembered briefly through headlines, police summaries, and sensational reporting, before being absorbed into the larger anonymity that often surrounded working-class immigrant victims during the period. Yet the case still reveals important truths about life in late 19th century New York. It exposed how vulnerable immigrant women could become inside crowded boarding conditions. It demonstrated the severe limitations of pre-modern forensic investigation, and it showed how rapidly newspapers could transform uncertainty into public mythology. Helen Carlett was detained and released. Emil Bortis was investigated and effectively cleared through alibi testimony. The mysterious, tall, stout man in black was never conclusively identified. And the official ruling never changed: homicide by person or persons unknown. Today, the Minnie Weldt case survives only in scattered newspaper archives, coroner records, and retrospective historical research. No final arrest resolved the murder. No courtroom verdict settled public suspicion. No surviving evidence definitively answered who entered that apartment on East 61st Street during the night of May 29, 1894. The city moved on, the file remained open, and somewhere inside the crowded silence of old New York, the person responsible disappeared into history without a name.